Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your learning materials, your sources, and really boil them down to the core insights you need. Maybe you're prepping for an exam, or maybe you're just curious about, well, how we learn.
That's the plan. And you've given us some really rich material today on learning theories. Our mission really is to unpack all of that classical conditioning, behavioral stuff, cognitive approaches, even memory in a way that makes sense and actually, sticks.
Okay, great. Let's start with the classical conditioning. The basic idea is learning through association, isn't it?
Exactly. Association.
But those terms, conditioned response, unconditioned stimulus, they can be a bit of a mouthful at first.
They can. But the key isn't memorizing labels, it's understanding the logic, right? How pairing things creates these new learned responses.
Right, the logic. Like with Pavlov's dogs. That's the classic, isn't it?
It is. You have the meat powder, the unconditioned stimulus, and that naturally makes the dog salivate. That's the unconditioned response. No learning needed there.
Okay, natural reflex.
Then Pavlov brings in something neutral, like a bell. Initially, the bell means nothing to the dogs regarding food.
But then he rings the bell right before giving the meat powder. And he does this again and again.
Precisely. And after enough pairings, just hearing the bell makes the dog salivate. The bell transforms from neutral to a conditioned stimulus.
And the salivation just to the bell, that's the conditioned response.
You got it. And importantly, this often involves involuntary stuff, heart rate, maybe fear, gut feelings, things we don't consciously control.
It's amazing how powerful that is in humans, too. Your sources mentioned emotional reactions, attitudes.
Oh, absolutely. Even things like drug addiction triggers or psychosomatic symptoms. Think about a song that instantly takes you back to a feeling or a memory.
Yeah, or a certain smell. Totally classical conditioning.
It's everywhere once you start looking.
So the timing of this pairing must be important, right? The temporal relationship.
Crucial. The most effective way is what's called delay conditioning or forward conditioning. The bell starts just before the meat powder and overlaps a bit.
Okay, a slight overlap.
Yeah, and that half-second interval seems to be a sweet spot. Then there's trace conditioning, bell rings, stops. Then the meat powder. Still works, but not quite as well.
And simultaneous. Bell and powder at the exact same time.
Less effective again. And backward conditioning meat powder first, then the bell, well, that barely works for conditioning, if at all. The bell predicts nothing useful then.
So sequence matters. A lot. And I guess the number of times you pair them matters too.
Definitely. More trials usually mean a stronger, more reliable conditioned response. But it's interesting, the conditioned response, salivating to the bell, it probably won't ever be as intense as the original unconditioned response to the actual meat.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like an echo. What if the dog already heard that bell loads before, without any food connection?
Prior exposure. That slows things down. The bell is already known to be meaningless in that context, so building the new association takes longer.
Okay. But once it's learned, can it be unlearned? Extinction.
Yep, that's extinction. Keep ringing the bell, but stop bringing the meat powder. Eventually, the dog stops salivating to the bell. The conditioned response fades.
But is the learning gone forever?
Probably not. The evidence suggests it's more inhibited than erased.
How do we know?
Because of spontaneous recovery. After extinction seems complete, sometimes, maybe after a break, the conditioned response can just pop back up again, usually weaker, but it's there.
Wow. So the connection is still lurking.
Mm-hmm.
And stimulus generalization. That means things similar to the bell might also work.
Exactly. Maybe a slightly different pitched bell or even a buzzer. The dog might generalize the response. For humans, think PTSD triggers a car backfiring might sound like gunfire.
Or test anxiety, just talking about exams, might trigger that feeling.
Right. But then there's the opposite. Stimulus discrimination.
Learning the difference.
Yeah, the dog learns that only this specific bell predicts food and other similar sounds don't. You pair the specific bell with food, but present other sounds without food.
But your source mentioned if the sounds are too similar, it can get tricky, maybe even agitating.
That's right. It's hard to discriminate, creates a kind of conflict. Excitation versus inhibition, it can be stressful.
Okay, now layer it up. Higher order conditioning.
This is cool. Once the bell reliably causes salivation, that's first order, you can pair a new neutral stimulus, say a light, just before the bell.
Without the meat powder now, just light, then bell.
Correct. After enough pairings, the light alone might start to cause salivation. That's second order conditioning. You can even try for third order, though it gets weaker.
But wait, what if you try to add the light at the same time as the bell once the bell is already conditioned? Does the light also become conditioned? Blocking, right?
That's blocking, exactly. If the bell already perfectly predicts the food, the light adds no new predictive information. So the animal doesn't really learn an association with the light. The original conditioning blocks the new one.
Okay, the light is redundant. What about overshadowing? Sounds similar.
It is similar but distinct. Overshadowing happens when two neutral stimuli, say a bright light and a quiet tone, are presented together before the unconditioned stimulus, like a shock.
Okay, both new, presented simultaneously.
Right. Learning occurs to both, but if you test them later individually, only the more salient one, probably the bright light in this case, will elicit the conditioned response. Fear. The more intense stimulus overshadows the less intense one during learning.
Got it. Nuances. These distinctions are important, and all this really paved the way for behaviorism, didn't it? John B. Watson.
Absolutely. Watson took these principles and ran with them, focusing purely on observable behavior. Forget internal states, just look at stimulus and response.
And the little Albert experiment.
Infamous.
Infamous is right. Ethically questionable today, for sure, but it showed classical conditioning in a human infant.
Pairing a white rat, which Albert initially liked,
with a sudden, loud, scary noise. The unconditioned stimulus causing an unconditioned fear response. And soon, just seeing the rat, the now conditioned stimulus, made Albert cry and try to crawl away. Conditioned fear.
And it generalized. He became afraid of other white furry things too, a rabbit, cotton wool, even a Santa mask. A powerful, if unsettling, demonstration.
Okay, so classical conditioning explains how these associations form. How do we use these principles therapeutically to change unwanted responses?
Right. That brings us to interventions. Counterconditioning is a key idea. You pair the thing that causes the unwanted response, like the rat for Albert, with something that elicits an incompatible response.
Like pairing the rat with cookies, something pleasant.
Exactly. Something that elicits relaxation or happiness, which is incompatible with fear. You're trying to override the old association.
And Joseph Wolf's systematic desensitization uses this idea for anxiety.
Precisely. It's very structured, 4 stages. First, teach deep relaxation skills. Second, build an anxiety hierarchy list, feared situations from least scary to most scary.
Using that SUDS scale, subjective units of distress, to rate them.
Right. Third, the client practices relaxation while imagining items low on the hierarchy, gradually working their way up. That's desensitization in imagination.
And finally, if possible, real-life exposure in vivo desensitization, facing the actual feared situations step by step while using relaxation.
It's very effective for many phobias. Interestingly, though, when researchers dismantled the therapy to see what parts were essential,
What did they find?
it seems the exposure itself, confronting the feared stimulus without the bad thing happening, is the most critical component. Extinction is likely the primary mechanism.
Extinction again. Makes sense. Your materials also link counterconditioning to behavioral sex therapy. Masters and Johnson.
Yes, particularly for performance anxiety. They used principles to pair anxiety-provoking sexual situations with relaxation and pleasure.
How did that work?
Often involves homework, like starting with non-genital touch focused purely on pleasure, reducing pressure, then gradually moving towards more intimate contact, always pairing it with relaxation and communication, inhibiting the anxiety. Specific techniques like the squeeze for premature ejaculation or using dilators for vaginismus build on this.
Okay. Now, aversive counterconditioning sounds less pleasant.
It is. The idea is to pair the maladaptive behavior or the stimulus that triggers it with something nasty, like a shock or a nausea-inducing drug paired with alcohol, for instance.
Does it work well?
Its effectiveness is pretty moderate, honestly, and it has downsides. It seems best when the unpleasant stimulus is directly related, like making smokers experience the smell of stale smoke. Often needs booster sessions, maybe combined with other therapies like orgasm preconditioning for paraphilias.
Then there's covert sensitization, doing the aversion therapy just in your imagination.
Exactly. You vividly imagine the unwanted behavior, then imagine really negative consequences, getting sick, being profoundly embarrassed, sometimes followed by imagining avoiding the behavior and feeling relief.
And you mentioned distinguishing pleasant, unpleasant here from positive, negative, and operant conditioning.
Right. Here, it's about the inherent quality of the stimulus, nice or nasty. Later, with operant, positive, negative means adding or removing something. Good distinction to keep in mind.
Got it. Okay, let's talk phobias again. Specifically, Mower's two-factor theory.
A really influential theory. Factor 1, classical conditioning. A neutral thing, like a spider, gets paired with fear. Maybe you're startled. The spider becomes a conditioned stimulus for fear.
Okay, that's the start. What's factor 2?
Operant conditioning. You feel anxious near spiders, so you avoid them. Avoiding them reduces the anxiety that's negative reinforcement. The avoidance behavior gets stronger, maintaining the phobia.
So treatment needs to break that avoidance cycle.
Exactly, which leads us to exposure therapies, like in vivo exposure with response prevention, especially key for OCD.
Exposure to the trigger, like touching something contaminated.
And then preventing the compulsive ritual, like hand washing. You expose them to the anxiety obsession, but block the anxiety-reducing behavior, compulsion.
Letting the anxiety naturally decrease through extinction, can it be gradual or all at once?
Both exist. Gradual exposure, working up the hierarchy, or flooding intense, prolonged exposure right away. Research suggests longer exposure sessions are often better than short bursts. And interestingly, you don't necessarily need peak anxiety for it to work. Self-guided and group exposure can also be effective.
What about panic disorder? Interoceptive exposure.
That's about inducing the physical sensations of panic, maybe rapid breathing, spinning, exercise in a safe place.
Well, I do that.
To teach the person that these sensations, while unpleasant, aren't actually dangerous, they learn to tolerate them without freaking out, breaking the fear of fear cycle through exposure and preventing avoidance of those feelings.
Implosive therapy sounds a bit different, more psychodynamic.
Yeah, it blends behavioral exposure with psychodynamic ideas. The feared thing is seen as potentially symbolic of underlying conflicts or impulses. Therapy involves intense imaginal exposure to the feared stimulus, maybe including those symbolic themes, until the anxiety subsides, confronting the core fear, essentially.
And lastly, EMDR eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. For PTSD mostly.
Primarily developed for PTSD, yes, but used more broadly now for trauma. The idea is that trauma overwhelms normal processing, leaving memories stuck.
So you recall the trauma.
In brief doses, while doing bilateral stimulation, usually therapist-guided eye movements, but sometimes tapping or tones. The theory is this helps the brain reprocess the memory, making it less distressing and integrating it more adaptively.
Is it definitely the eye movements that do it?
That's still debated. Some argue the exposure component is the key active ingredient, similar to other trauma therapies, and the eye movements might not be essential. Research is ongoing.
Fascinating. A lot of these ultimately involve confronting the fear to extinguish it. Okay, let's shift gears now to operant conditioning.
Right. So classical conditioning was about involuntary responses triggered by associations. Operant conditioning is about how the consequences of our voluntary actions shape whether we do them again.
Rewards and punishments, basically.
Essentially, yes. Think Thorndike and Skinner.
Thorndike and his cats in puzzle boxes, trial and error.
Exactly. Cats learned that certain actions, like pulling a loop, led to escape and food a satisfying consequence. This led to his law of effect. Behaviors followed by satisfaction get stamped in, behaviors followed by discomfort get stamped out.
Did he stick with that exact idea?
He refined it. He later emphasized that positive consequences strongly increase behavior, but punishment wasn't quite a reliable mirror image for decreasing it.
Then Skinner built on this.
Hugely. Skinner focused on how voluntary behaviors operate on the environment and how the environment's response reinforcement or punishment changes the likelihood of that behavior.
And he clarified reinforcement increases behavior, punishment decreases it.
Correct. And crucially, that positive means adding something, negative means removing something. Not good or bad, just add or subtract.
So positive reinforcement. Add something good, praise, to increase behavior.
Tidying room.
Yep, positive punishment. Add something bad, scolding, to decrease behavior, hitting sibling.
Negative reinforcement. Remove something bad, nagging stops, to increase behavior, doing chores.
Perfect. That nagging example is classic. And negative punishment. Remove something good, allowance, to decrease behavior, missing curfew.
It's about the effect on the behavior.
Always. Did it increase or decrease? What was added or taken away?
And Skinner uses Skinner boxes to study this meticulously.
Right. Operant chambers. Allowed precise control and measurement with rats pressing levers, pigeons pecking discs, seeing how reinforcement schedules affected response rates and extinction.
Extinction in operant conditioning means the behavior fades when reinforcement stops.
Exactly. Stop rewarding the lever press and eventually the rat stops pressing, though you might see an extinction burst. First, a temporary increase in pressing before it drops off. Like the rat is thinking, hey, where's my food?
Kind of. And behavioral contrast. If a pigeon pecks 2 keys for food and you stop reinforcing one key, pecking on the other, still reinforced key might increase even more.
Skinner also talked about primary versus secondary reinforcers.
Right. Primary are inherently rewarding food, water, warmth, basic needs. Secondary reinforcers like money, praise, tokens get their power by being associated with primary
And the
ones.
schedules.
Yeah.
How often reinforcement happens? Continuous versus intermittent,
Continuous is reinforcement every single time, good for teaching a new behavior quickly.
but easily extinguished if the reward stops. And maybe you get full satiation.
Exactly. Intermittent or partial reinforcement, only rewarding, sometimes makes the behavior much more resistant to extinction. Think about gambling.
Right, that's variable ratio, isn't it? Rewarded after an unpredictable number of responses. Keeps you hooked.
The most powerful schedule for maintaining behavior. Then you have fixed ratio, reward after a set number of responses, like piecework.
Fixed interval. Reward for first response after a set time, like waiting for a bus.
And variable interval, reward for first response after an unpredictable time, like checking email. Each creates different response patterns. Fixed schedules often have pauses after reinforcement.
The matching law suggests we match our effort to the reward rate.
Generally, yes. If one activity pays off twice as often as another, we'll tend to do it twice as much. And superstitious behavior, that's accidental reinforcement, right?
Yeah, like wearing your lucky socks because you won a game once while wearing them. You link the behavior and the random reward.
Classic superstition. Stimulus control is also key cues in the environment, signaling when a behavior will pay off.
Like traffic lights. Green means go, reinforced. Red means stop, not reinforced.
Perfect example. And we see generalization too. A similar stimuli might trigger the response, or similar responses might get reinforced.
And escape and avoidance conditioning. Learning to get away from or prevent bad stuff.
Right. Escape is getting away from something unpleasant that's already happening. Avoidance is preventing it from happening in the first place, often triggered by a warning signal.
Okay, so how do we use operant principles to increase desirable behaviors?
Positive reinforcement is the go-to. Make it contingent, only reward the desired behavior. Make it immediate, reward quickly. Start continuous, then thin to intermittent. Ensure the reward is meaningful. Explain clearly what's being rewarded. Use prompts if needed, then fade them.
And shaping. Rewarding baby steps towards the goal.
Crucial for complex behaviors. Reinforce successive approximations and chaining links steps together, teaching a sequence, often rewarding only at the end.
The Premack principle, using something fun to reward doing something less fun.
Eat your broccoli, then you get ice cream. Using a high probability behavior to reinforce a low probability one. And differential reinforcement. Reward the good behavior, ignore the bad.
Okay, now the trickier part. Decreasing unwanted behaviors using punishment. Ethically complex.
Very. If used, immediacy and consistency are vital. Punish every time, right away. Moderate intensity, too weak is useless, too strong is harmful. Explain why. Remove any rewards maintaining the bad behavior. Crucially, always reinforce an alternative positive behavior.
But the downsides. Fear, aggression, avoidance. It
Yeah.
doesn't really teach the right thing, just suppresses the wrong one.
Often, yes. And the effects can be short-lived or context-specific. Forms include verbal reprimands, overcorrection, restitution plus positive practice, negative practice, repeating the bad habit until sick of it, response cost, losing a privilege or tokens, and timeout.
Timeout from positive reinforcement, taking the get away from the fun for a bit.
Yes. Brief removal from the reinforcing environment. Best when short, immediate, consistent with explanation, and combined with reinforcing good behavior later.
And operant extinction, just removing the reward for the bad behavior.
Yes. Stop giving attention for tantrums, for example. Its success depends on consistency, no slipping. The original reinforcement schedule, intermittent, is harder to extinguish. How strong the reward was and whether you're reinforcing other, better behaviors.
These operant principles underlie lots of interventions, like contingency contracts.
Formal agreements. Clear behaviors, clear consequences, rewards punishments, feedback. Good for schools, families.
Token economies, too. Earning tokens for good behavior, exchanging them for rewards.
Common in residential settings, classrooms. Uses secondary reinforcers, tokens, can include response cost, losing tokens, needs clear rules, tracking, a plan to fade the tokens eventually, thinning, and choice in backup rewards to avoid satiation.
Social skills training also uses operant ideas.
Definitely. Modeling, coaching, rehearsal, feedback, reinforcement, homework. Effective for various difficulties like conduct problems or social deficits and schizophrenia.
And function-based interventions, figuring out why the behavior is happening.
Critical. What's the function or purpose? To get attention. Escape a task. Then find a replacement behavior that serves the same function, teach and reward that, and change the environment to make the old behavior less likely or rewarding. often involves careful observation, like ABC analysis, antecedent behavior consequence.
Okay, we've covered behaviorism pretty thoroughly. Let's move into the cognitive realm. Learning isn't just external SR lings or consequences, right?
Not at all. Cognitive learning theories stress the internal mental processes thinking, understanding, expecting. Learning involves insight, information processing, not just reacting.
Tolman's latent learning showed that, didn't it? Rats learned mazes without rewards.
Exactly. They formed cognitive maps. The reward was needed to motivate them to show what they'd learned, performance, but the learning happened internally, latently.
And Kohler's chimps, the aha moment.
Insight learning. Salt and the chimps suddenly figuring out how to stack boxes or use sticks to reach bananas. Not gradual trial and error, but a sudden internal restructuring of the problem.
Which leads us to Bandura and social learning theory, or social cognitive theory, learning by watching.
A huge contribution. We learn a massive amount by observing others' models. His Bobo doll studies were landmark.
Kids watched adults beat up a doll, then did the same.
But it's not automatic imitation. Bandura outlined 4 necessary processes. Attention, you have to notice the model. Retention, you have to remember it, often using symbols language. Production, you need the ability to actually do the behavior. And motivation, you need a reason to do it. Maybe the model got rewarded, vicarious reinforcement, or you expect external reward, or it's intrinsically satisfying.
What makes a model more influential?
High status, prestige, expertise helps. Being similar to the observer, age, gender, the behavior itself being visible, salient, relevant, and seeing the model reinforced is powerful.
Interesting application in phobia treatment coping models versus mastery models.
Right. A coping model who shows initial fear but then overcomes it is often more effective than a mastery model who seems fearless from the start, more relatable.
And guided participation. Model shows, then helps the observer do it.
Bandura found this highly effective, even more so than systematic desensitization for snake phobias in some studies, combines modeling with direct experience.
Self-efficacy is core to Bandura too, belief in your own ability.
Absolutely central. It comes from 4 main sources: our own past successes and active attainment, seeing similar others succeed, vicarious experience, encouragement from others, verbal persuasion, and our own physical and emotional states. Feeling calm boosts efficacy.
And a reciprocal determinism.
Yeah.
Everything affects everything else.
The triangle, behavior, environment, and internal person factors like thoughts, feelings, biology, all constantly interact and influence each other. It's dynamic.
Lastly, in cognitive learning, the learned helplessness model of depression.
Started with animals given inescapable shocks who later didn't even try to escape when they could, led to the idea that uncontrollable negative events cause helplessness.
How was it reformulated for humans?
Focused on attributions, the explanations we make. Attributing bad events to causes that are internal, it's my fault, stable, it's always going to be like this, and global, affects everything, was seen as leading to depression.
And revised again.
The revised version emphasized hopelessness as the key factor, feeling like bad things will happen and there's nothing you can do to change it. That feeling mediates the link between attributions and depression.
Okay, these cognitive insights pave the way for cognitive therapies, changing thoughts to change feelings and behaviors.
That's the core idea. Cognition mediates emotion and behavior. If you change the faulty thinking, you change the outcome. Often blends cognitive and behavioral techniques.
Like Ellis's REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, focuses on irrational beliefs.
Exactly. Ellis argued neurosis stems from irrational beliefs, rigid demands, musts, shoulds, awfulizing, low frustration tolerance, negative self-rating.
This is ABC model.
ABCDE, actually. Activating event, A, beliefs about it, B, rational or irrational. Consequences, C, emotional behavioral. Disputing irrational beliefs, D, and developing effective new beliefs, E.
How does the therapist act?
Often quite direct, educational, persuasive, even confrontational. Challenging those musts and shoulds using techniques like modeling, homework, desensitization, problem solving.
Then there's Beck's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Hugely influential for depression, anxiety.
Very widely used. Beck's model links symptoms to dysfunctional thinking patterns on 3 levels. Core beliefs or schemas, deep fundamental assumptions about self-world, automatic thoughts, the stream of surface-level thoughts, and cognitive distortions. the biases or errors in thinking that connect schemas and automatic thoughts.
Examples of distortions.
Arbitrary inference, jumping to conclusions. Overgeneralization, one bad event means everything is bad. Selective abstraction, focusing only on the negative detail. Personalization, blaming self unfairly. Dichotomous thinking, all or nothing. Emotional reasoning, I feel anxious, so this situation must be dangerous. There are many.
And different disorders have different cognitive profiles, like the negative triad in depression.
Right. Negative view of self, negative view of the world experiences, negative view of the future. CBT is usually time-limited, goal-oriented, maybe 15 sessions or so.
What's the process like?
Build rapport, educate about the model, set goals, explore belief history, plan for relapse prevention. The therapist-client relationship is collaborative empiricism, working together like scientists to test the validity of the thoughts. Socratic questioning is key, guiding the client to discover insights themselves.
And techniques, both behavioral and cognitive.
Yes. Behavioral stuff like activity scheduling, rehearsal, skills training, relaxation. Cognitive techniques like examining the evidence for thoughts, thought records, imagery rescripting, decatastrophizing. What's the worst that could happen and could I cope?
Other cognitive restructuring techniques, self-instructional training.
Teaching yourself helpful self-talk, moving from overt to covert speech. Thought stopping, interrupting negative thoughts, maybe replacing them with positive assertions. Attribution retraining, shifting explanations for success failure towards more adaptive patterns.
Okay, beyond restructuring thoughts, some therapies focus directly on coping and problem-solving skills.
Right. Like stress inoculation training has 3 phases. Conceptualization, understanding your stress response, skills acquisition, learning relaxation, cognitive coping statements, assertiveness, and application, practicing these skills in increasingly stressful situations.
And problem-solving therapy tackles how people approach problems.
Yes, looks at both problem orientation, your general attitude towards problems and your ability to solve them, and problem-solving style, rational, impulsive, avoidant. Aims to develop a rational style through education, practice, homework. Steps usually involve defining the problem, brainstorming solutions, choosing the best one, implementing it, and evaluating.
REMS self-control therapy for depression focuses on monitoring, evaluation, reinforcement.
Exactly. Targets deficits often seen in depression, biased self-monitoring, focusing on negatives, harsh self-evaluation, unrealistic standards, and low self-reinforcement self-punishment. Therapy helps clients track thoughts, set realistic goals, and reward themselves more.
Lewinson's behavioral model depression from low reinforcement.
Initially, yes, low rate of response contingent positive reinforcement. Therapy focused on increasing pleasant activities. Later versions incorporated cognitive components too.
What about client-driven techniques, self-monitoring?
Just tracking your own behavior can change it. Stimulus control involves changing your environment to cue desired behaviors. For example, only study at your desk and remove cues for undesired ones.
Biofeedback, learning to control involuntary responses.
Using machines to get feedback on heart rate, muscle tension, etc. to learn conscious control, often paired with relaxation, which itself is highly effective for stress.
And we need to remember the Yerkes-Dodson law here, too.
Yeah.
Arousal and performance.
Definitely. Performance is best at moderate arousal levels. Too low or too high, performance drops. And the optimal level is lower for complex tasks than simple ones, relevant for test anxiety.
Okay, we've learned, we've changed behavior, but how do we remember all this? Let's talk memory and forgetting.
Crucial piece. Memory involves encoding, getting info in, storage, keeping it there, and retrieval, getting it back out.
The classic model is the multi-store model. Sensory, short-term, long-term.
Right. Information processing model. Sensory memory is fleeting, holds raw sensory input. Short-term memory, STM, is limited capacity, about 7 ± 2 items, and duration, maybe 30 seconds without rehearsal. It includes working memory, the active manipulation of info. Long-term memory, LTM, seems vast, maybe permanent, holding knowledge, skills, experiences. Getting info from STM to LTM involves rehearsal.
Maintenance rehearsal, repetition versus elaborative rehearsal, linking to existing knowledge.
Elaborative is much better for LTM. And the serial position effect, remembering beginning, primacy, and end recency of lists better. That supports the STM-LTM distinction.
What about levels of processing? Deeper meaning, better memory.
An alternative view. Processing can be shallow, structural looks like, intermediate, phonemic sounds like, or deep, semantic meaning. Deeper processing leads to better recall, regardless of which store it's in.
LTM itself has divisions. Procedural versus declarative.
Procedural is knowing how, skills, habits, riding a bike, mostly implicit. Declarative is knowing that facts and events, can be semantic, general knowledge Paris is the capital of France,
Mm.
or episodic, personal experiences your trip to Paris. Episodic includes those vivid flashbulb memories.
Implicit versus explicit memory, conscious versus unconscious retrieval.
Explicit requires conscious recall, remembering a definition. Implicit is revealed through performance without conscious awareness, skills, priming effects. Different brain areas involved: hippocampus frontal lobes for explicit, basal ganglia cerebellum for implicit, and perspective memory is remembering to do things in the future.
Attention is obviously key for getting info into working memory.
Absolutely. Working memory capacity is strongly linked to attentional control. Models like Baddeley's multi-component model, central executive controlling phonological loop, visuospatial sketchpad, episodic buffer, try to explain this. Theories like filter theory or feature integration theory tackle how we select what to attend to.
And memory isn't a perfect recording, is it? It's constructive.
Hugely important point. Memory is reconstructed, influenced by our schemas, expectations, even later information, not like a video playback. This has big implications for things like eyewitness testimony.
Why do we forget? Trace decay theory. Memories just fade.
That's one idea, but it doesn't explain everything, like why forgotten memories can suddenly return.
Interference theory. Other memories getting in the way.
More accepted, retroactive interference. New learning messes up recall of old info. Proactive interference, old learning messes up recall of new info. Happens a lot with similar material.
Cue-dependent forgetting. The info is there, just can't access it.
Like the tip of the tongue feeling. You lack the right retrieval cues. Providing good cues can bring the memory back.
So how can we improve memory?
Encoding specificity principle. Recall is better if the context and cues at retrieval match those at encoding. State-dependent learning is similar. Matching emotional state helps.
Elaborative rehearsal, again making meaningful connections.
The best single strategy, probably. Link new info deeply to what you already know.
Mnemonic devices.
Correct.
Tricks like acronyms or the method of loci.
Very useful. Method of loci, memory palace, uses familiar locations. Verbal mnemonics use acronyms like ROYGBIV, or acrostics like sentences where first letters form the words you need. They impose organization and meaning.
And arousal. Moderate levels are best.
Yes. Back to Yerkes Dodson. Not too stressed, not too bored. Finding that optimal zone, especially for complex learning or recall, like on an exam, is key. Balance study with managing arousal.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. We've covered a huge amount of ground, from Pavlov's bell right through to cognitive distortions and memory palaces.
We really have. And hopefully, seeing how these ideas connect classical conditioning, setting foundations, operant shaping voluntary acts, cognitive theories adding the crucial layer of thought, and memory holding it all together makes the whole picture clearer.
It feels much more integrated now. Learning theory isn't just one thing. It's this rich tapestry of interconnected ideas explaining how we adapt and change.
Exactly. And while this was a detailed overview based on your sources, it's still just scratching the surface of a massive field. Hopefully, it sparks further curiosity in areas people found particularly interesting. These concepts are fundamental in psychology and have real-world applications.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for listeners to ponder.
Okay, how about this? Start noticing learning principles in your own daily life. Where might subtle classical conditioning be shaping your gut reactions? What behaviors are being reinforced, maybe without you even realizing it? How do your own thought patterns influence your feelings and actions? It's fascinating to apply this lens to yourself.
A great takeaway. Makes you see everyday experiences in a whole new light.